Camera speed.
Sound production, take one.
Action!
Welcome to From Beneath the Hollywood Sign. If you love old movies, Hollywood history, or the golden age of filmmaking, you've come to the right place. This is the podcast that talks about amazing stories of Tinseltown from another era. Hear fascinating conversations with writer-producer Steve Cubine, who quite literally lives just beneath the Hollywood sign, and actress-writer Nan McNamara. Now your hosts, Steve and Nan.
Hey everybody, welcome to a great episode of From Beneath the Hollywood Sign. Hi Nan.
Hello, Steve.
How are you?
I'm very well. I'm so happy that summer is here and we've got so many exciting things coming up. This is our 90th episode.
Wow.
In just 10 episodes, we are going to be celebrating, do the math,
100! How did that happen?
It's crazy. And we have some special things planned for that we're working on, so
yes,
we'll keep you posted.
We do. We have a very exciting special 100th episode coming up, so stay tuned.
But this week, we get to kick off June with our Star of the Month.
The Star of the Month is Mark Stevens. Ring a bell? Anybody? Don't feel bad if you don't know who Mark Stevens is, because in a few minutes you will. You'll know so much about Mark Stevens. You'll be clamoring to go see Mark Stevens movies.
And you'll be the person at the cocktail party that can say, well, I know who Mark Stevens is.
A little bit about Mark Stevens. The reason I like him so much, and I chose him as our Star of the Month. When I was a kid, I saw this great film noir called The Dark Corner, where Mark Stevens stars with Lucille Ball in a very rare, dramatic performance, although there's a lot of comedy to her drama. And I just love this guy. He had this rugged charisma that I just really responded to. And then not long after that, I saw I Wonder Who's Kissing Her Now. And I suddenly saw this guy singing and dancing and these romantic leads.
Opposite.
Yeah, and I thought, that's the same guy? This is crazy. So it really got me interested in Mark Stevens because I think he's very versatile. Is he the best actor in the world? No. Is he the best looking guy in Hollywood? No. A lot of people would say he's a serviceable leading man, not a star. Mm-hmm. I don't disagree with that. However, I think his charisma and his versatility certainly makes him worth checking out.
Yes.
So we're going to give Mark his due today.
He was born Richard William Stevens on December 13th, 1917 in Cleveland, Ohio. His father was an aviator and his mother was a housewife. Now, his parents divorced when he was 3, and he moved to England with his mother to live with his grandparents. His grandfather, Captain William Morrison, was ship's captain for the royal family.
How cool is that?
How cool is that? And I'm not even sure I know what that is.
When they take the luxury yachts out, he's the captain?
He's the captain,
I don't know.
Yeah. So while Richard is in England, his rebellious spirit gets him kicked out of several schools. When his grandparents died, the family moved to Montreal, Canada, where his sister lived.
Now in Canada, his mother remarried a wealthy locomotion manufacturer whom Stevens really, really adored and was a great stepfather to him. Growing up, though, Stevens was very small in stature, but he built himself up through athletics. He was a very athletic guy. He was actually a champion swimmer, and he was training for the Canadian Olympic team when he injured his back in a diving board accident. This injury required him to undergo several surgeries, and it left him bedridden for many, many months. He initially set out to be a painter before he got interested in theater, which is interesting.
You mean like an artist?
Like an artist, yeah. Not a house painter. Yeah. Ambition.
Right, he did have ambition.
Well, he eventually got involved with the Corona Barn Players of Montreal, and he was soon landing leading roles on stage. He had a very nice singing voice, and that also led him to musical roles in theater throughout the Canadian provinces. And he also began to sing in local nightclubs. He continued to hone his craft by acting in radio thrillers also in Canada, and he eventually got his own radio show. Well, he did go to New York briefly. He thought he wanted to break into Broadway, but after spending a few nights in Central Park penniless on benches, he decided that maybe Broadway was not for him.
Okay. I'm surprised. I would think that with his singing and his acting abilities that Broadway would have welcomed him his looks.
Yeah, there was no room in the inn for baby Mark.
For him, yeah.
So he did. He ended up going back to Cleveland, and that's where he continued in theater.
Well, he isn't able to get into the Army because of his back injury. He moves to Akron, Ohio, where he lands a job in the haberdashery department at Polsky's. I love a good haberdashery.
Yeah, I just love the word.
Yeah, I do too.
We should bring that word back.
Yeah, there is a haberdashery in the Twin Cities. It's called the haberdashery.
Oh, I love that.
Anyway, he switches though to cosmetic sales. So he must
can
have
charm the ladies.
I was just going to say he
Yeah.
must have been able to charm. And then he won a promotion to floor walker. But the department store work was really not for him. So he soon got a job, and he had the background in radio work at the radio station WAKR in Akron, Ohio, as a, wait for it, turntable guy, which is something that doesn't even exist anymore.
I know. And I'm assuming that's the guy who literally just turns the records on the table.
Yes. He learned the ropes of radio and eventually began producing his own radio drama entitled Was I Right?
That's a show that I should start because I say that expression all the time. Was I not right?
Was I right? And he conducted man on the street interviews. This is fascinating. He was working at the station the morning that the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. So he was the guy that actually broke the news to the listeners. He's quoted as saying, "I'll never forget that day. We were sitting around the station's newsroom watching the teletype for material for our newscast when a flash came through on Pearl Harbor. Naturally, we made a hurried check, and after making certain that the whole thing was authentic, I broke in on a program to issue the announcement."
Wow.
Yeah.
He worked in radio for a couple of years, but being the ambitious guy that he is, he also set his sights on Hollywood. He wanted a film career. So he eventually moved to Hollywood in 1942, and because of the war, many of the male stars had joined the armed forces and they were away. So the studios needed new talent in the film industry.
Good timing.
Great timing for him. You know, he couldn't go to the army, so why not go to the stage?
Right.
Well, he was discovered by a talent scout, and he was eventually offered a contract at Warner Brothers where he was paid $100 a week. Warner Brothers then gave him the star treatment. They darkened and straightened his ginger-colored curly hair, they covered his freckles with makeup, and then they changed his name to Stephen Richards before assigning him small roles in films like Destination Tokyo from 1943 with Cary Grant and John Garfield, The Doughgirls from 1944 with Ann Sheridan, Hollywood Canteen, also 1944, that starred every Warner Brothers star on the lot.
Yes, right.
One of my favorites, God is My Co-Pilot, 1945 with Dennis Morgan and Dane Clark, and also a movie that Nan and I just saw at the Turner Classic Film Festival, Rhapsody in Blue, 45, which starred Robert Alda and Joan Leslie.
Well, around this time, Stevens met actress Annelle Hayes. She was a pretty Texas University co-ed, and they met on the set of the film Objective Burma, 1945, and it was love at first sight. Annelle later told Silver Screen magazine, quote, "He had the most perfect manners I ever saw. He was very quiet, yet sweet, too. I had enormous fun with him. He had great confidence in himself. He proposed on a roller coaster."
Oh, how cool is
I
that?
love that. Well, they got married in January of 1945, and they would go on to have two children, Mark Richard and
Arel.
Arel,
right?
as opposed to
Annelle.
Annelle. So she just changed those two N's to two R's.
Clever.
Yeah. That
Well-
must have been hard, though, when she was being called in the house.
Like, which one is
Arel,
it?
Annelle.
And they named the son Mark. Mark and Arel, Mark and Annelle.
Yeah, that's confusing.
That's confusing. Well, it's kind of apropos that he proposed on a roller coaster because their relationship, as you will see,
Yes.
became quite a roller coaster.
Yes, right.
After Warner Brothers dropped Mark Stevens' contract, he landed up a few weeks later at 20th Century Fox, where Daryl Zanuck gave him a new name, Mark Stevens, and they gave him, more importantly, better roles. He had fourth billing in Within These Walls, 1945, which starred Thomas Mitchell and Mary Anderson, and this was a very showy role for Stevens. He played this wrongfully convicted prisoner who falls in love with the judge's daughter. It also won him critical praise and put him on the radar of the powers that be at 20th Century Fox. They then loaned him to RKO Studios for his first leading role in the drama From This Day Forward, 1946, which starred Joan Fontaine as his wife. Now, From This Day Forward, it's this charming film told in flashbacks about this young couple and they're struggling to survive throughout the Great Depression. It also featured a bevy of some of our favorite character actors.
Yes.
Rosemary DeCamp, Harry Morgan, Bobby Driscoll, who we've done an episode on, and the great Mary Treen from
Yes.
It's a Wonderful Life. Stevens would later cite this film as his personal favorite of all of his films.
Well, after he was loaned out to RKO, he's back at Fox, and he's cast in the role that he's probably best known for,
Yes.
which is what you talked about at the top of the episode. The Dark Corner, 1946, an above-average film noir that co-starred Lucille Ball and Clifton Webb. In The Dark Corner, Stevens plays a tough guy private eye, which I think that's the perfect kind of role for him.
Oh, so perfect for him.
Surprised it took them that long to kind of find
Yeah.
that niche. The film was hailed by critics and was a box office hit. Critics called Stevens tough, rugged, and grim in spades. This film's success led to Stevens being voted the 5th most promising star of tomorrow in 1946 by movie exhibitors.
Well, who was 1 through 4, I wonder.
know.
It makes you wonder.
That sort of thing, yeah.
His next film for Fox, it was a major departure from his tough guy role in The Dark Corner. It was this appealing musical, which I also mentioned top of the show, I Wonder Who's Kissing Her Now, which came out in 1947, which co-starred June Haver, Martha Stewart, and Reginald Gardner. Stevens played famed songwriter Joe Howard. Such a departure from his tough guy
Yes.
detective. In this film, Stevens' character, he sings, he dances, but Stevens didn't sing in the film, despite having a very nice singing voice. His voice was dubbed by popular big band singer Buddy Clark.
I wonder if he fought that at
I
the
know,
time. I
being
wonder
a
if he said,
singer.
I can do this. 'Cause-
Yeah, it's like, Ava Gardner wanted to sing so badly in
Yeah.
Showboat, and they wouldn't let her, although she had a lovely voice. Yeah,
Right,
maybe.
right. Well, around this time, Stevens took 10 weeks off for back surgery, so he must have had some lingering issues with that injury. It was during this recovery time that he actually separated from his wife, Annelle, and started a very public romance with none other than Hedy Lamarr. That's quite the couple. In a Time magazine article from October 6th, 1947, it was reported, quote, ripe-mouthed Hedy Lamarr found herself playing the understanding older woman. Back to his wife, she sent 26-year-old actor Mark Stevens, now appearing in I Wonder Who's Kissing Her Now, and freely told the press just how it went. He is very young, explained matron Lamarr at 32 years old. And I told him I thought he and Mrs. Stevens should try to make a go of their marriage. I talked to Mrs. Stevens. She sounds like a lovely person. Wow.
So interesting.
There's got to be more
I know.
behind that,
Well,
right?
it reminds me of the Robert Mitchum story where Ava Gardner decided they were going to be a couple, and he's like, well, fine, go talk to Dorothy. And
Dorothy
Ava went to talk to Dorothy, and Dorothy said no.
Oh, boy.
Well, apparently, Stevens heeded Hedy Lamarr's advice,
Yeah.
and he soon reconciled with Annelle, and he made a very public apology through gossip columnist Luella Parsons. And he said, and this is a quote, I was a fool to ever leave my home and Annelle and the baby. I'm going to try to make it up to her in every way. You know, the trouble with those of us who have the good luck to be received in Hollywood is we believe our own publicity. We get to thinking we are something very special. We get our names in the papers and we say to ourselves, we're pretty important. And then boom, all of a sudden you realize all that's been given to you could be taken away just as fast. I'm going to try to make up to Annelle in every way.
Well, that's quite a lot of humility
he saw
there.
the ills of his way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I think before we get further into his career, it's time for this week's Hollywood Pop Quiz.
And the Hollywood Pop Quiz question today, when he went over to 20th Century Fox and Daryl Zanuck gave him the new name, Mark Stevens, where did the Mark come from? Because Zanuck had a very specific reason for naming him Mark.
I'm sure he did. And we will find out what that is after this.
Steve and Ann will be right back, but first another stop on the Hollywood tour. So they mentioned that 1946 film called The Dark Corner, co-starred Lucille Ball. Well, Ball's experience shooting that film was tough. She didn't get along with director Henry Hathaway. Ball later said that Hathaway bullied her on set so badly that she developed a stutter. And when that happened, Hathaway accused Ball of being intoxicated. I guess not everyone loved Lucy, huh? Well, now years later, Ball reportedly acknowledged her own shortcomings during the production. In a conversation with Hathaway, she admitted she'd been hard to work with. She reflected on her behavior and expressed that she'd learned from that experience. Hathaway said he appreciated her candor and considered it a very gracious gesture. In the end, while The Dark Corner was a tumultuous project for Ball, it ultimately contributed to her growth as an actress and showcased her versatility beyond comedy. And now back to Steve and Ann from Beneath the Hollywood Sign.
Welcome back, everybody. Before we get further into our star of the month, Mark Stevens, I wanted to give a big shout out to our listener of the week, and this one's a good one. We recently heard from listener Rhett Judice, I hope I pronounced that correctly, and he told us the greatest story about when he first moved to Hollywood. He and his first boyfriend hiked up to the Hollywood sign. Remember, this is 1979, so they had just redone the entire Hollywood sign. But he said that there were remnants of the old sign and debris still scattered along the hillside.
That's amazing.
And he and his boyfriend took some of these pieces, and he now has original pieces of the original Hollywood sign, and he's framed them in the most incredible way in his house. So, Rhett, thank you for sharing that story, and thank you for the support of the podcast. You are our listener of the week.
Thank you, Rhett.
Thanks, Rhett.
Well, back to Mark Stevens. So he returns to his tough guy persona in the terse crime drama The Street with No Name, 1948. In this film, he plays a cop who infiltrates Richard Widmark's mob gang.
And I've seen this movie.
Yeah.
And I do have to say, Richard Widmark mops the screen with him.
Does he really?
Mark Stevens is fine in this movie,
Yeah.
but my God, Richard Widmark steals the movie.
He's also memorable, and this is a great film.
Yes.
As Olivia de Havilland's loving husband in the Best Picture Oscar-nominated drama The Snake Pit from 1948. That might be the one that people really go,
Yes.
oh yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of
is.
people will see that movie and say, oh, that's Mark Stevens.
Yes. Well, he continued with showing his versatility in the Western Sand with Colleen Gray and Rory Calhoun. And then he ended the 1940s back in the musical genre, reteamed with June Haver in Oh You Beautiful Doll, 1949, playing an ambitious songwriter, and then also in Dancing in the Dark, 1949, with William Powell and Betsy Drake.
Now, when the 1950s kicked off, Stevens was being loaned out to MGM to portray one of the three men romancing Deborah Kerr in the romantic comedy Please Believe Me, which came out in 1950. This also starred Robert Walker and Peter Lawford as his romantic rivals.
So he's in really good company in these films.
He's at probably the pinnacle of his career right now in the early 50s. Now, over at Columbia Pictures, he gets loaned out and he stars alongside Edmund O'Brien and Gail Storm in a very enjoyable, sort of a cop buddy movie.
Okay.
Which I love this movie. I've seen it a couple of times. It's called Between Midnight and Dawn, which also came out in 1950. Great movie.
Well, he's really been at every studio in town. Now he moves to Universal, where the quantity of his movies increases, but the quality begins to diminish a bit. His first film at Universal was Katie Did It, 1950, a romantic comedy. He plays the slick commercial artist who woos model Anne Blythe. Due to some comic misinformation, Blythe's character thinks that Stevens' character is already married with 2 kids. I haven't seen that film, but it
Me
sounds
either.
cute.
It sounds very cute.
The film also featured some of our favorite character actors, Cecil Calloway, Jesse White, Elizabeth Patterson, and Irving Bacon.
Now, in 1951, he appeared in Target Unknown, where he plays this army captain fighting off the Germans in this sort of a run-of-the-mill war picture. He followed that up in Little Egypt, 1951, where he plays this con artist who gets involved with this Egyptian princess, played by, when you think of Egyptian princess, who do you think of?
Oh, of course, you think of Rhonda
Fleming. I love casting back then.
I know, it's crazy.
Well, after this, he was in a comedy called, and this is a really cute picture. I've seen this one. It's called Reunion in Rio from 52, where he plays an attorney who's been hired by this precocious 9-year-old little girl played by Gigi Perot, who has hired him to seek a divorce from her parents, played by Frances D. and Leif Erikson. Like, how many times as a 9-year-old have you wanted to divorce your parents?
Yes, it's a great premise.
Very cute picture.
Yeah.
And he was also quite good in the title role of Jack Slade from 1953. This was a Western that really allowed him to play this kind of vengeful, alcoholic, hothead sheriff who operates kind of outside the letter of the law to rid the area of all the criminals.
Well, he next tries his luck in television and becomes the third actor after William Gargan and Lee Tracy to play the title character in the police drama Martin Kane. After one season, he left to replace another actor, Patrick McVeigh in the drama series Big Town, and he does that from 1954 to 1956.
Well, by now he's kind of grown tired of the grind of television and the long hours, and he's kind of frustrated with his film roles he's being offered. So Stevens took matters into his own hands, and he began his own production company, Mark Stevens Productions. He soon began writing and directing and producing films that, of course, he would star in.
Good for him.
Yeah, smart. Create your own content. And while none of these movies were actually classics, they did manage to give him more interesting roles than he was being offered at Universal. The first film from his newly formed company was Cry Vengeance from 1954, and this also marked his directorial debut. Now, in this film, which also starred Martha Heyer, he plays this ruthless ex-cop seeking revenge. He also directed the movie Timetable from 1956, which featured Felicia Farr, King Calder, and an early role for Jack Klugman. In this one, he investigates a train robbery. He went on to direct many episodes of TV, including The Loretta Young Show and Wagon Train. Now, unfortunately, his production company failed, and it closed its doors in about a year, which sent Stevens into financial ruin.
Oh, boy. Well, in the late 50s, he appears in some humdrum westerns like Gunsight Ridge, 1957. Have you seen that with Joel McCrea?
Never seen that one.
Gun Fever. They love to have gun in the title.
Yeah.
1958, which he also directed that one, and Gunsmoke in Tucson, 1958 with Forrest
Little
Tucker.
gun theme there.
Yeah. Now, around this time, he also fell in love with Mallorca, Spain. After filming an adventure drama there called September Storm, 1960, he was on location opposite Joanne Drew. So he began splitting his time between Hollywood and Spain. Many felt that he took refuge in Spain to avoid creditors after his business had gone belly up and he filed for bankruptcy. His nomadic ways, though, were really hard on his family, and his wife, Annelle, divorced him for good in 1962.
Well, by the mid-1960s, he appeared periodically in sort of B-grade Hollywood movies like Escape from Hell Island, 1963, and Fate is the Hunter, 1964, where he supported stars Glenn Ford, Nancy Kwan, Rod Taylor, and Suzanne Pleshette. He also appeared in films shot in Europe, but the quality of these films were no better than what he was being offered in Hollywood. He was totally wasted in this science fiction disaster called Frozen Alive from 1964, which I saw one day in late afternoon, and it's dreadful. And he was also in the spaghetti western Sunscorched in 1965.
Well, by the late 60s, Stevens knew that his film career was waning, so he began investing. Among his acquisitions were a successful restaurant and several apartment buildings. So this made him a really wealthy man.
Phoenix rose from the ashes.
Yeah, exactly. Living permanently in semi-retirement in Spain, he married a second time to a Swedish woman named Hilda. But he was sometimes lured back to Hollywood during the 70s and 80s to guest star on television shows like Kojak, SWAT, Murder, She Wrote, Simon & Simon, Magnum P.I., and Scarecrow and Mrs. King, some of my favorites.
I was going to say, I love these shows. I also read, and it's not in here in our notes, but he also became a novelist. He wrote like 4 novels in his retirement in Spain.
And what was the genre?
I don't know.
Okay.
I really don't. I don't know that any of the 4 were actually published.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think that's why we don't know a lot about his novels, but he kind of retired to become this gentleman novelist, which is kind of cool.
And investor.
Yeah, an investor. Well, Mark Stevens' last screen appearance was in 1987.
On the TV series The Law and Harry McGraw.
Everyone remember that one?
I do not remember that at all.
I don't either, but it starred Jerry Orbach and Barbara Babcock.
Okay.
Great cast. Well, Mark Stevens passed away at age 78 of cancer on September the 15th, 1994 in his beloved Spain.
So, Steve, what would be your top 3 movies to check out for his work to get a flavor of who Mark Stevens was?
Well, definitely The Dark Corner.
Yeah.
It is such a great film noir. Plus, you get to see Lucy. It's awesome.
Yeah.
I would say that. I would also say, although it's a small part, I think you have to see him in The Snake Pit.
Yes.
He plays such a sympathetic, loving, supportive husband through all of this. And he's really wonderful and shows a real soft side to himself. And also, I would throw in there, God, there's so many, but
I wondered about Cry Vengeance. I think I have that in the DVR.
yes, and I've seen Cry Vengeance.
Because he directed that,
and it's
too.
good. I don't know that it's one of his best.
Okay.
It's worth checking out, absolutely. So many to choose from.
All right. Well, thanks so much for listening, everybody. It's time now for this week's Hollywood Pop Quiz.
And the question was, when Daryl F. Zanuck gave him the new name Mark Stevens, what did the Mark part come from?
I have no idea.
I know. It's interesting. He named him after the character that Dana Andrews played in the big 20th Century Fox hit movie Laura, which is really interesting because throughout his career, Mark Stevens was always called the poor man's Dana Andrews.
Okay.
Interesting.
You never want to be called the poor man's
Anything, exactly.
No. Well, we would love it, everybody out there, if you would give us a 5-star review. And if you would follow us on social media, our handle is @FromBeneathTheHollywood You can find us on Instagram and Facebook, and you can watch the podcast on YouTube.
And you can email us at info@FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign.com.
That's this week's view.
From Beneath the Hollywood Sign.
You've been listening to From Beneath the Hollywood Sign with Steve Cubine and Ann McNamara, the podcast that celebrates amazing stories of Tinseltown from its golden era. Join us next week for another episode and learn something else about Hollywood you probably never knew. Take a moment and give us a 5-star rating and a positive review, and tell your friends about us too. It'll help grow the podcast. Visit Steve's website at FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign.com. The executive producers are Steve Cubine and Nan McNamara. Executive producer and post-production supervisor Lindsay Schnebley. Associate producer and researcher John Price Ritchie. This podcast is part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. Visit airwavemedia.com to listen and subscribe to their other fine shows like The Box of Oddities and The Shallow End with Schnebley and Toth. Copyright 2025. All rights reserved. That's a wrap.